going to talk about some details around what happens when we put our attention on something and the level of presence or self-awareness one needs to be deliberate about how we're doing these things, particularly things that are troubling or worrisome for us. Welcome to the Medicine of Presence Lecture Hall. Two things before we proceed. First, much of what we are covering in this video, you are already probably doing, knowingly or intuitively. This discussion will heighten your awareness of what that is. Second, everything here and so much more is embedded and concentrated in the Little Truths tonic videos, which are an application of what we are discussing. You will find links to the Little Truths videos in the description below. Please use them as often as you'd like to practice and apply these concepts in your real-world scenarios. You will also find links to a self-study reflection course if you want to deepen your integration of the components discussed here today. Without further ado, let's step into today's lecture. Settle in and enjoy. So let's say something is bothering us. Let's say something is on our minds, on our hearts, and has our attention. And in that attention, we are focusing on that. What happens when we're focusing on something? In our focusing, we magnify our view of that, and we amplify our experience of that. So if we think about our cameras and zooming in on something, focusing on, let's say, a little wildflower in the grass, in the fields, in zooming in on that, we can pick up so much detail, so much nuance about that flower and about its immediate context. And it is a fantastic thing to do. It's details and aspects of beauty there that we would not have picked up if we were taking a landscape picture of the entire field. However, in zooming in on that, while we're looking at that little flower in its magnified form, everything else is out of view. Everything else is not even blurred. It just does not exist within the frame of that zoomed in shot. So we're also, when we're looking at that zoomed in flower, our experience of that flower is amplified. We can really feel the existence of that and almost step into that world as if that world were the only world that exists. And if we zoom out again, we can then get the sense of that flower in its context in the field. So the ability to zoom in and zoom out is really important. If we were not able to do that, we would miss quite a lot on either side of the spectrum. Now, we're doing the same thing with our energy, with our attention. So if we are focusing on something, effectively zooming in on that, we're magnifying that, in which case we get to see a lot of detail, a lot of nuance that we otherwise would not have been able to pick up from the zoomed out perspective. We also amplify our experience of that. So that becomes momentarily, while we're zoomed in, the world that we're inhabiting. And everything around that is non-existent. So if we think about this in terms of what we're doing with our attention, with our mind, if we are dealing with something that's causing a distress, perhaps it's a challenge, perhaps it's a threat, perhaps it's a sorrow, while we're focusing on that, the longer we focus on that, the more we magnify it, the more we amplify our experience of it. That's a really good thing to know, to remember. It's not something that we're not aware of, but it is something we tend to forget or overlook in the heat of the moment when we're engaging with something. Now, it requires a level of awareness, a level of presence to catch oneself in that process. Now, catching oneself in that process does not mean stopping it. It just means being aware of what is going on. So, to zoom in and to zoom out again in time before that zoomed in perspective starts magnifying itself so much and amplifying your experience so much that it pulls you deeper and deeper in until you forget that anything else exists. And even if you do, it's a massive tug of war pulling out of that because the experience has now built up so much of momentum. So backing out of something that has, it's like falling into the gravitational field of a planet if you were in outer space and you get trapped in that gravitational field. It's really, really difficult to back off. But coming in, it's before, there's a very soft pull and then gets stronger and stronger. And sometimes if you don't want to be pulled in and you don't have the power to back off again, you want to know the limit of how far you can go so that you can back off again with the available power in your system. So, we could imagine something like a Star Trek scene with a ship that is traveling and coming into range of a planet. And that ship must know its specs, whoever is operating that ship. They would know the specs, they would know the power in the system to resist the gravitational pull of a body, be it perhaps it's a planet out there or an asteroid, something with a gravitational field. And if that ship goes as far as it can, knowing how far it can go, it can then reverse its engines and back off. If it takes it to the limit, it would need the limit of its engine capacity to back off. If it goes beyond that, then there's very little that they can do because now they're trapped in a pull that is stronger than their capacity to back off. So, bringing it back to our experience as human beings, focusing in on something. If we imagine each thing we're focusing on has its own gravitational pull, and the longer we focus there, the closer we get to the source of that pull. It's another way of saying the same thing. That item that we're focusing on, perhaps it's a health challenge, perhaps it's a relationship challenge. The longer you're focusing on it, the bigger it gets because you're coming in closer, in a way, the little ship coming in closer to the massive asteroid. And our experience of that gets more and more all-encompassing. So if we are unaware of all of this going on, and if we have not yet developed a sense of our own capacity to withstand the gravitational pull of something, then it's very easy to just keep moving in because this has its own pulling force. And the closer you get to that, the stronger the pull. So if we think about putting our mind, basically we're sending our mind towards something, we must know that there is a risk of us being pulled so close in that we're unable to back off, at least unable to back off easily without some dramatic crisis management kicking in. However, if we do know our capacity, we can focus in as much as we can safely and then back off and come in again if need be and back off. So being able to do that, being able to zoom in and zoom out, first of all, it's much healthier than staying fixed in either a zoomed out perspective or a zoomed in perspective, right? That range of motion, that range of movement is a natural capacity we have, and we should be using it and practicing it and being skilled in that. However, part of the skill is knowing your limits and how far you can go on either direction, right? Zooming out too far also puts you in a bit of a non-existent place because then there's nothing, no details. Zooming in too far gives you very specific details, but completely out of context and out of perspective. So zooming in and zooming out, focusing in, focusing back out. Very, very important. So when we think about everyday challenges that one may be dealing with, either yourself or somebody you know, and when they get stuck, perhaps it's somebody you know, when they get stuck, usually what is going on is they're focusing in on something that has now, they're too close, the experience is so amplified, the thing they're focusing on is so magnified that the perspective is now completely out of context of the bigger picture that this item is in. And perhaps more important, or more the greater risk here is that one is too close and it's now built up so much of energy that that energy has created its own sticking force, its own gravitational pull on one's attention. So pulling one's attention out of that now requires a Herculean effort. Now, if one has enough awareness, enough presence of mind that they understand this risk, it becomes a risk when we get into trouble, right? But it's not really, in a more neutral sense, when we understand this phenomenon. And if we have enough self-awareness that we have a sense of our own capacity and our own reach, our own limits, then we can navigate this threshold much more skillfully and therefore gain the benefit of being able to focus in and pick up details and pull back out, right? Much, much more effective and productive if there is a specific task we're wanting to tackle or a specific challenge we're wanting to see ourselves out of. But certainly also a lot healthier in terms of our mental health, our emotional health, even our physical health. Because when we get stuck in something that, especially something that's problematic, some sort of pain, some sort of distress, some sort of unrest, when we get stuck in there, that unrest energy now is the energy that's dominant in our entire world that is so zoomed into this problem. Right? It becomes the entirety of our existence while we're there, or at least the dominant energy. And that distress energy is running through us, through our cells, affecting our physical cells, and therefore our physical organs. It's affecting our mind, our clarity of thought. It's affecting our emotions and our access to softer, warmer, gentler emotions. All of those things are now no longer available when zoomed into an existence that is a distress existence. There we're tapping into emotions that are upsetting and worried and worrisome and fearful. And our minds are likewise generating thoughts that continue with the amplification of that, right? And we're just noticing more and more things that match with that. So all in all, it puts somebody completely out of balance in themselves. And while they're out of balance, they're putting out an energy field that is affecting those around them. For the person involved, it's a very uncomfortable thing to be stuck in such close proximity to an object of attention that is distressing. Now, what do we do? Ideally, we have grown to know ourselves over time and develop the awareness of our limits and the skill sets of knowing how to pull back and how to come in. If we have not yet become skilled at that, then to prepare becoming skilled at that, to think about that in advance before one is stuck in a situation that you can't get out of. There's nothing like being stuck to motivate one to try and break loose. But it's not the best time to build up the skill, because that's crisis management, and that requires usually rescue measures from outside help. Because the reason you got stuck is because you went beyond your threshold, and the capacity in your system just does not have the power to back off. So it's not the best time to begin practicing that. However, it's a really good time to make a decision about putting yourself in a position in the future as a long-term measure where you are much better equipped at this skill and this level of self-awareness that you can feel your system being sucked into something, and you're aware enough to know when to back off and to know when to stay there at the threshold and what tools you can use to do that. Okay. Sometimes a very simple, effective tool is just to shift your attention to something else that is a very different experience for you. But doing that in a very deliberate way to bring your mind and your emotions out of this object of attention and focusing it on a different object of attention, not taking your thoughts with you while you're running or while you're hiking so that you're busy working on that in a different environment. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is zooming out from the thing that you're troubled about and zooming into something else with very deliberate attention, of being very present with the something else in its own, responsive to the nature of that thing. For example, if you are looking at a flower in a field while you're taking a walk outside, really nothing else, as if nothing else exists, to zoom in on that and really take in the perfection and the beauty and the delicateness of that beautiful flower, that living, breathing piece of beauty that is right there in front of you now. Right? So not sitting and looking at the flower and still thinking about your problem. Leaving that there, coming here, taking this in, letting this become for a moment the entirety of existence, and then zooming out again. And then if you're needing to tackle this again, the next stage of this process that you're in, then you go back as far as is wise, back off, focus somewhere else. So to be able to do that, right? So we're talking about two things here. The skill set of zooming in and out on something is one, and that's very, very important. The second thing is the skill set of shifting your focus deliberately to balance, to counterbalance, and to maintain and sustain a good balance in your system. Because if you're focusing on something that is causing you pain, back off before it becomes too much and it tips the balance of your system into a state of crisis. Take in something else that is generating a sense of harmony, balance, beauty, love, life, color, sweetness, peace, calm. Take that in, because while you're focusing on that, that's the energy that's moving through your system, through your cells, and therefore through your organs, through your mind, through your heart, through your emotions. And then zoom out, and then zoom into whatever else it is you're working with, zoom out. So now we're speaking about awareness and developing the awareness of not just what you're doing in the moment, but you, yourself, your own capacity, your own state of being when you're up to whatever it is you're up to, your own shifting in energy as you're focusing in and out of whatever it may be, and how that balance works for you, how that works best for you. So developing this is something really, really, first of all, it's an interesting task to set oneself, to get to know yourself in that way. And in the long run, it's very, very useful. You know, it's so much easier to navigate. And we're living in a world that is throwing all sorts of things at us these days. So to be able to navigate these things is very, very important. And secondly, it gives us the opportunity to possibly even enjoy whatever it is we're engaged with, even if it is a challenge. You know, there's a huge difference in dealing with a challenge when we're trapped inside the challenge compared to when we're engaging with the challenge with the freedom of movement. That gives us a sense of this being your choice to deal with, and you're working with that as best you can within your capacity, which is a much wiser way to do it. And there, you know, from there, that experience can transform even to something that is very, very rewarding and satisfying, where it becomes not a challenge to be overcome or a villain to be defeated, but a creation. You're starting with a piece of clay that has not yet been molded into anything, and you slowly working that into something that does bring beauty and joy to you and to others around you. So that frame of dealing with something that is initially unpleasant, knowing that this is a creative process, it's a very, very different energy of engagement than dealing with this as something to be fixed or defeated or overcome. Right? So a lot more scope in all of these things than people often allow themselves to tap into. So to sum up, when we're focusing our attention on something, our attention will magnify that. It becomes larger in our experience, and we amplify that. It becomes bigger in our experience, larger and bigger. So larger in the sense that it starts blocking out our view around us, and our perspective starts narrowing in on that. and amplified in that the reality of this becomes bigger and bigger for us. And what we're really wanting to move toward is a sense of self-awareness, a degree of presence of mind, that we know our capacity and when to back off from something before we get so immersed that we can't easily back off, and to put ourselves in a position with enough skills and tools to be able to shift our focus and shift our zoom. Okay. I think for now, we'll stop there. Well, now comes the best part, to put these things into practice as you step out of this lecture hall with the added awareness and insights that you've gained, and find out for yourself how this works for you. This is Janeshri Govinsamy at the Medicine of Presence Clinic and Training Center, where we know that health is so much more than the absence of disease. It is to be joyfully alive, awakening each day fresh and eager, with childlike anticipation of the day ahead. Wishing you well.